I never minded the sound of the sawmill. It was loud, yeah, but it meant work, steady work, honest work. It meant my wife, Rachel, was out there doing what she loved. Not many women work at a mill, but Rachel wasn't like other women. She was strong, stubborn, and proud of her calloused hands. She came home every day with sawdust in her hair and sap on her jeans, and I loved her for it. We'd been married 5 years when the accident happened. We lived in a small town in northern Minnesota, where the winters bite and the snowbanks climb like skyscrapers by December. I worked maintenance for the local school district, fixing broken heaters, tightening leaky pipes, keeping the lights on. Nothing fancy. Just enough to get by. Rachel and I didn't have kids. It wasn't that we didn't try. We did. But life has a way of putting some dreams in the freezer, hoping maybe they'll thaw out later. Sometimes I thought she carried that failure like a second skin. Didn't help that her folks kept asking when we'd finally get to it. But we had each other, and we had our routines. She made coffee every morning like clockwork, black for her, 2 sugars and milk for me, and I kissed her goodbye before she headed to the mill. That morning started like any other. But it didn't end like one. I was fixing a radiator in the middle school when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost. But something made me answer. Is this Mr. Collins? Husband of Rachel Collins? The voice was a man, too calm to be good news. Yeah. Who is this? This is Eric from Black Timber Sawmill. There's been an incident. Rachel's being taken to Mercy General right now. My blood went cold. I dropped my wrench and was out the door before he could say anything else. The hospital smelled like bleach and sadness. I found her in ICU, tubes in her arms, a bandage across her temple, her hair matted with dried blood. A nurse said a forklift slipped on wet sawdust. It struck a stack of boards that came down like an avalanche. Rachel had been on the wrong side of it. She's lucky to be alive, the doctor told me. Head trauma. A pretty serious concussion. She'll wake up, but recovery could be unpredictable. Just be patient. I was patient. 4 weeks. Rachel came home in early November. She didn't remember the accident. Not fully. She said she remembered the loud crack, then black. The cold of the floor. Someone yelling. She looked the same. Same blue eyes, same chapped lips, same long brown hair, though now she wore it in a tight braid, like she was afraid it might catch on something again. But something inside her had shifted. Like a wheel that had slipped a gear. She was quieter, but her thoughts jumped around like stones skipping across a lake. She'd start talking about what she wanted for dinner and end up ranting about how the government tracked her through the toaster. Then she'd laugh like it was a joke, but her eyes never smiled. And then there were the nights. Nights she couldn't sleep. Nights when she'd sit by the window, staring at the snow falling outside. Nights when she'd mutter to herself, scratch her arms raw, or disappear into the cold without a word. At first I chalked it up to trauma. Head injuries are complicated, right? I Googled it. I read every pamphlet they gave me. Mood swings. Personality changes. Memory issues. I told myself this was temporary. But winter came fast that year. With it came storms, sharp winds, and something colder than snow in Rachel's eyes. One night, just a week before Christmas, I woke up to find her side of the bed empty. I checked the bathroom. Nothing. The kitchen? No note, no coffee brewing. I looked out the front window, and I saw her footprints in the fresh snow leading down the street toward Maine. I knew where she went. There was only one place open past midnight in our town. The Rusted Elk. A bar with wood-paneled walls and a jukebox stuck in 1982. Pool tables, neon signs, and a crowd of drifters, loggers, and men who drank too much and talked too little. I pulled on my boots and coat and followed her tracks through the snow. The snow was knee-deep by the time I got to the bar. My breath came out in white clouds, my cheeks burning from the cold. I hadn't even zipped my coat all the way, just rushed out the door like a fool chasing a ghost. The rusted elk sat at the edge of town, where the paved road turned to gravel. Its sign buzzed and flickered, half the letters burned out so it read Rusted EK, like a bad joke. The parking lot had 5 trucks parked out front, all caked in road salt and grime. I recognized 2 of them, Gary's old Ford and the black Silverado owned by Mick Rowley, a man who used to work with Rachel before he got laid off for drinking on the job. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of beer, sweat, and old pine. A Hank Williams song played low on the jukebox. The lights were dim. Shadows hung in the corners like cobwebs. Then I saw her. Rachel. She was laughing, head tilted back, mouth open wide in a way I hadn't seen since before the accident. She was at the pool table, leaning close to Mick as he lined up a shot. Too close. Her hand was on his back, her fingers slowly tracing something across the denim of his jacket. Gary was sitting at the nearby table, grinning into his glass, eyes fixed on her like a man watching a movie he didn't want to end. She was wearing a short brown coat I didn't recognize. Beneath it, a tight red sweater I'd never seen before. Not that I kept tabs on her wardrobe, but this was new. Flashier than Rachel ever wore. The kind of thing you put on to be noticed. My first instinct was to walk in and call her name. Just say, "Rachel, come home. What the hell are you doing?" But I didn't. I stood just inside the door, blending into the dark, watching her sway her hips as she walked around the table, joking with Mick and Gary like they were old lovers reunited. I waited. Long enough to see Mick win the game. Long enough to see her lean in and whisper something in his ear. Long enough to see her laugh when he grabbed her hip. That laugh, it broke something inside me. I left before they saw me. I didn't say a word when she came home 3 hours later, her cheeks flushed red and her hair tousled like she'd walked through a storm backward. She smelled like cigarettes and men's cologne. Not mine. "You're up," she said, like she didn't see the rage in my eyes. "It's cold out there tonight." "Where were you?" I asked. "Walking. Needed air." She dropped her coat on the floor and went to the bathroom. The lock clicked. The faucet turned on. I sat on the couch, fists clenched, heart thudding. I should have confronted her. Right then. But I didn't. I let her lie. Because I needed to believe maybe it was just a one-time thing. Maybe the injury made her confused. Maybe this was some twisted version of therapy, of trying to feel alive again. But it wasn't the last time. The snowstorms came more often, like the sky had a grudge against us. Each time it snowed hard enough to keep the town inside, Rachel found a way out. Sometimes she left when I was asleep. Sometimes she told me she needed to go for a drive or clear her head. And every time, I knew where she went. The Rusted Elk. Always the same bar. Sometimes the same men. But not always. One night, I followed her again. This time I stayed long enough to see her disappear into the back hallway with 2 men I didn't recognize. I watched the door shut behind them. And I waited. 30 minutes passed. When she came out, her lipstick was smeared and one of the men was zipping his jeans. She didn't even look ashamed. Just walked past me like I was invisible. I stopped eating. I stopped sleeping. I started thinking. Not the kind of thinking a husband should ever have to do. I remembered the girl I married, the sawdust in her hair, the smell of pine on her skin. I remembered the cold nights we held each other close, before any accidents, before the head injury. But all that felt like it had been chopped into firewood and fed to a flame I couldn't control. I wanted to fix it. God knows I did. But there's a point when love turns into something sour. Something rotten. That's where I was now. Rotting on the inside. And revenge? It started whispering to me. Just little thoughts. Nothing sharp yet. But steady. Like a saw blade warming up. By the second week of January, I'd stopped asking where she was going. There was no point. She lied to my face like it was nothing, like lying was just another thing her head injury had rewired. And maybe it had. Maybe the Rachel I married had been knocked clean out of her own body and replaced by this stranger who smiled at men in bars and came home reeking of whiskey and cheap sex. The doctors had warned me, hadn't they? Changes in behavior, disorientation, aggression, emotional dysregulation. They used all those words like they meant something. But none of it captured the way Rachel looked through me now like I was drywall. None of it explained how she could leave me in a snowstorm to go get railed by a pair of strangers and then come home humming a tune. I started writing things down. Not because I thought anyone would read them, but because I needed a record. I needed to prove to myself I wasn't going crazy. That the things I was seeing were real. January 6th, came home 2:13 a.m. smelled like gin. Lipstick on her neck. January 8th, argued with the toaster. Accused me of being wired by them. January 12th, told me she needed to taste blood, in a whisper. Then laughed. Sometimes she'd come home and sit on the floor, peeling the skin off oranges and dropping the pieces in a line across the carpet. One night she just stood in the backyard barefoot, staring up at the moon until her feet turned purple from the cold. Other times, she'd be almost normal. She'd make coffee. She'd fry eggs. She'd ask about my day like she cared. But it never lasted. Something in her was fractured. And whatever came through those cracks wasn't Rachel. Not really. I started watching her. I'd sit in my truck parked across the street from the Rusted Elk. Engine off. Lights out. Just a silent shadow waiting in the dark. Sometimes she left with one guy. Sometimes two. Once, I watched her get into a truck with a man who had a Confederate flag stitched to his jacket and a snake tattoo crawling up his neck. She kissed him before she even got in the passenger seat. I didn't follow. I couldn't. Instead, I just sat there gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white and the cold made my teeth chatter. It wasn't about jealousy anymore. It was about betrayal. It was about watching the woman I built a life with turn into someone I couldn't recognize, even worse, someone I couldn't reach. And I was tired of pretending I didn't see it. One night, she came home with a bruised lip and a ripped sleeve. She laughed when she saw my face. "Don't look at me like that," she said. "It's just a scratch. You should see the other guy." "What other guy?" I asked. Her eyes gleamed. "Doesn't matter. He liked it rough. So did I." She walked past me like she didn't see the way my jaw clenched or the heat building behind my eyes. She went straight to the bathroom and slammed the door. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling for hours, listening to the wind push against the windows. The whole house groaned like it was ready to collapse under the weight of what we'd become. That's when the plan started to form. Not all at once. Just a spark. A whisper in the dark corners of my mind. I didn't want to hurt her. But I wanted her to feel it. To know what it was like to be forgotten, to be used, to be stripped down to nothing but regret and silence. I wanted her to remember what it felt like to lose something that mattered. But I'd do it slow. Quiet. Calculated. She wouldn't see it coming. The next morning, I made her breakfast. Eggs over easy. Toast, burnt just how she used to like it. I even brought her coffee in bed. She blinked at me like I'd just morphed into a stranger. "What's this?" she asked, frowning. "Just thought I'd do something nice," I said. She stared at the food, then at me. For a second, her eyes softened. Like the Rachel I used to know was still in there somewhere. But then it was gone. She picked up the fork and started eating like nothing had changed. She didn't notice that I'd started locking the basement door. Or that I'd moved the bolt cutters from the garage to the shed. She didn't notice when I found the old camera I'd buried in the attic and started charging the batteries again. She didn't notice a lot of things. Because she wasn't looking anymore. She thought I'd given up. She thought I was too weak to fight back. She was wrong. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I didn't want to serve it cold, I wanted it frozen. I wanted Rachel to feel the chill of it seeping into her bones, the way I had felt the cold every time she disappeared into the snow and came back reeking of strangers. But to make her feel it, I had to become something else. I had to become what she never expected. Kind. Patient. Invisible. I started small. I washed her clothes after her late-night bar visits. Said nothing when I found someone else's cologne soaked into her jeans or when her underwear came back inside out from the floor of someone else's truck. She barely noticed me. I became background noise. That's exactly what I needed. I offered to drive her to work, though her hours had been cut. The sawmill didn't like her episodes. The foreman called me once, asked if she was on something. Said she threw a clipboard at a coworker just because he asked her to put on safety goggles. But she always came back home, somehow. And the more she spiraled, the more I stayed steady. I wanted her to depend on me again, like she used to. I wanted her to forget I had eyes, ears, and a memory sharper than any blade they used at the mill. Out back in the shed, I set up my workspace. You can do a lot with tools if you know how to use them. I had a bench grinder, a soldering iron, old cameras from my dad's pawnshop days, and one of those little handheld audio recorders from back when I used to do job site reports. I started collecting footage. Not of her at the bar, I didn't need that anymore. I filmed her at home. Talking to herself. Yelling at the sink. Laughing at a broom. Stroking her hair like it belonged to someone else. I clipped the sound from one night when she screamed into her pillow for 23 straight minutes. Played it back on my phone the next morning while she was brushing her teeth. She flinched like a deer caught in headlights. "You okay?" I asked casually. She nodded too quickly. Paranoia. That was step one. One night, I pretended to fall asleep on the couch. She stepped over me around midnight and whispered something I'll never forget. Dead weight. Always was. I never moved. Just kept breathing slow and steady while she slammed the door behind her. I recorded that too. Not because I needed proof, but because I wanted to feel it again. I wanted to keep the fuel burning. When you're this deep into winter, you don't stop to cry. You gather wood. You make fire. And I was building a bonfire. Then came the photo album. I found it in the back of our closet. Our life together, in big silver letters. From the wedding to our first house to the lake trip where we caught nothing but mosquito bites and sunburns. I started altering the photos. Subtle at first. In some, I blurred her face just a little. In others, I pasted in the men I'd seen her with, standing behind her, hands on her shoulders, watching me like they knew the joke. Then I printed them out, nice and glossy. Put them right back in the album. Waited for her to find it. She did one night when the power went out. I left the flashlight on top of the album like bait. Watched her through the cracked door as she flipped page after page, her fingers trembling. By the 5th photo, she dropped it. By the 8th, she ran to the bathroom and threw up. She didn't say a word to me about it. Didn't need to. Her silence was the first sign that the trap was working. I knew it wouldn't take long after that. She started checking the locks twice at night. Kept asking if I had heard things. Voices, she called them. Static in the walls. I told her she was just tired. That it was probably just the wind. She started drinking less, not because she didn't want to, but because she was afraid of what might happen if she blacked out again. I could see it in her eyes. She was starting to doubt herself. And doubt is a dangerous thing when your mind's already cracked. Then came the final step: control the environment. I painted the spare bedroom black. Every inch. Floor to ceiling. Didn't explain why. She didn't ask. Just stared at it like it was swallowing the light. I placed a single chair in the middle of that room and bolted it to the floor. Next to it, I put a speaker connected to the recorder I'd filled with all the worst things she'd ever said to me. Then I locked the door and waited. I wasn't going to hurt her. That was never the plan. But I was going to make her sit in the dark and listen. I was going to make her hear what I heard. Feel what I felt. Over and over. Until it broke through whatever wall was still keeping her safe from the truth. And the truth was simple. She'd taken everything from me. And now I was going to take her back, one piece at a time. I never actually locked her in the black room. I didn't need to. Rachel locked herself in. It started with nightmares. The first night she slept in that room, by her own choice, mind you, she came out at 4 a.m., pale, wet with sweat, whispering, "They're watching me." I asked her who. She didn't answer. She just kept staring at the chair in the center of the room like it was some altar she'd sinned at. She tried to sleep beside me that night, but something in her was different, like she didn't want to touch me, or be touched. That was fine. I didn't want to touch her either. A week passed. Every night, she'd go back into that room. Sit in the chair. Shut the door. Sometimes I'd hear her humming. Other times, she was just silent. But I knew she wasn't just sitting there. The recorder played every single night on a loop. Her voice played back to her, mangled, twisted, clipped to just the ugliest bits. "You're pathetic. I'd rather be with anyone else. They don't talk like you. They feel." Over and over. She started biting her fingernails again. Then her lips. Then she shaved her head. No reason. Just took the clippers and did it. When I came home and saw her standing in the kitchen, pale scalp blotchy with red scratches, she smiled and said, "Now I can think better." I nodded like it made sense. And in a way, it did. The town got colder. Winter dropped in like a hammer. Snow blanketed everything, even the guilt. I stopped salting the front steps. She fell twice. Bruised her hip once, her elbow the second time. "Gravity's mad at me," she whispered after the second fall. "No, Rachel. Gravity's just the only honest thing left in this house." She stopped going to the bar completely. I didn't even ask her to. It was like she forgot it existed. She'd start making dinner, but halfway through, she'd wander into that room and just sit. The meals burned. Smoke alarms shrieked. I never turned them off. I wanted her to feel the heat of her own unraveling. Then one morning, I walked into the room and found something new. She had written names on the walls. Dozens of them. Men's names. Some I recognized: Caleb, Jerry, Ryan, the guys she used to meet behind the mill, or at that motel just outside town. But others? No clue. I think some of them were imagined. Or maybe there were more than I'd ever known. Maybe I was just scratching the surface. The black paint was smeared from her fingers. She was sitting in the chair, rocking slightly, whispering, "I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to." I sat beside her on the floor, silent. Because I believed her. She didn't mean to become what she became. But she did. And now she was drowning in the very mess she made. The night I turned the power off, she screamed. Not for me. Not for help. Just screamed. Like a wild animal sensing the end. She banged on the walls. Clawed at the floor. Cried for her mother. Then cried for God. And then she was quiet. For a long time. I went in the next morning and found her curled under the chair like a child. The names on the wall had been crossed out in black marker. All except one, mine. She looked up at me with swollen eyes. "Do you still love me?" she asked. I didn't blink. I never stopped. That was the truth. And also the most painful part of this whole thing. She doesn't drink anymore. Doesn't go out. Doesn't talk much. But she follows me around the house like a shadow now. Clings to my sleeve like I'm the last warm thing left in her world. And maybe I am. But make no mistake, I'm not saving her. I'm just holding her still. Because we're not done yet. There's more I want her to remember. And there's still one last door she hasn't opened. The one in the basement. I never told Rachel about the basement. But she found it anyway. It was 2 days after the blackout, the one I caused on purpose, cutting the breaker to the entire west side of the house just to watch how she'd react in the dark again. I had gone out to pick up supplies. I was only gone an hour, but when I got back, I found the basement door wide open. The light was on. That was the first surprise. The second? She was down there, sitting on the concrete floor, barefoot, her back to the furnace, just staring at the shelves. The shelves I built. The shelves filled with reminders. Photos. Printouts. Flash drives. IDs. Motel receipts. A stained denim jacket I stole from the back of her lover's truck the night I slashed his tires. Memories. She was staring at it all, but her face wasn't angry. It wasn't afraid, either. She looked calm. Like she finally understood. "You kept all of it," she said without turning to me. "Yeah," I replied. "I did." "Why?" I didn't answer right away. I sat down beside her. The floor was cold. The air still smelled like rust and old oil. "When you love something," I said, "you don't let it kill you without keeping the evidence." She didn't laugh. She didn't cry. She reached out and picked up the motel receipt, the one dated December 14th, just last winter. Signed in her fake name. Paid in cash. "This one wasn't even mine," she whispered. I froze. "What?" She looked at me. "I signed it, yeah. I booked the room. But I never showed up. That was the first stone in the avalanche." "What are you talking about?" I asked. "I followed you there." "No," she said. "You followed someone who looked like me." I wanted to say that was impossible. I wanted to yell. But then she stood up and walked over to the wall. Behind the shelves. To a space I'd never shown her. A locked cabinet. Except it wasn't locked anymore. She opened it slowly and pulled something out. A videotape. Labeled in my handwriting. "January 11th, parking lot, confirmed. I watched this while you were out," she said. "You weren't careful with your hiding spots." I felt sick. Because I remembered exactly what was on that tape, her. In the back seat of her car. With 2 men. Laughing. But now, as she slid the tape into the old VCR I kept for preservation, and played it, I saw something else. It wasn't her. It looked like her. Moved like her. But there was something off. The tattoo on the left shoulder was wrong. The mole under her collarbone was missing. And the laugh? It wasn't hers. It never was. I didn't do half the things you think I did, she said, calm as snow. But you made me believe I did. I backed away. Because suddenly the room didn't feel like a shrine of revenge. It felt like a confession booth. And I wasn't the priest. I was the sinner. And the worst part? She wasn't lying. Because deep in my gut, I knew, I had started seeing betrayal where there wasn't any. And once that seed was planted, it grew into something monstrous. So maybe she had cheated. Once. Twice. But all those men? Some weren't real. Some were planted. Some were just reflections of my own suspicion. She had gone mad from guilt. But maybe the guilt wasn't all hers. I'm not saying I didn't mess up, she said, stepping closer. I did. That first night at the bar. I was drunk. And stupid. She paused. But I didn't deserve all this. The tape kept playing behind her. Laughter filled the basement. But this time, it was laughing at me. I stood frozen. My perfect plan. My cold, surgical revenge. All of it built on half-truths and faulty memories. And now? She knew. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She just walked up to me, put her hand on my cheek, and whispered, "You broke me to fix something that wasn't mine to begin with." And then she turned. And walked up the stairs. And left me standing there in the dark. Rachel didn't leave the house after that night in the basement. But she didn't talk to me either. We became ghosts in the same halls, brushing past each other in the kitchen, passing silently on the stairs. The only sound was the wind scratching at the windows and the snow building up like ash outside. She didn't go near the black room anymore. She didn't sit in the basement. She just stared out the front window like she was waiting for something, or someone, to come take her away. But no one came. And I didn't stop her. Because I couldn't even look at myself in the mirror anymore. I spent hours replaying everything in my mind. Every confirmation, every tape, every name on the wall. I'd built an entire religion out of rage. Worshipped at the altar of suspicion. And now? Now the God I created had no power. Rachel's words from the basement clung to me like frostbite. You broke me to fix something that wasn't mine to begin with. She was right. I just didn't know how much. The final unraveling came on a Wednesday afternoon. Rachel was gone. Not missing, just out. She left a note. Borrowing the truck. I'm not running. Just thinking. I sat at the table and read it 5 times. Then I went to the backyard fire pit. I had built it back when we were happy. Back when we thought we'd host neighbors, grill ribs, and drink cheap beer under Christmas lights. We never did. Now it was just a black circle in the snow. I carried out a cardboard box. One of the heavy ones from the basement. Inside, tapes, pictures, motel receipts. The proof. I poured gasoline over it, and lit a match. The fire was loud. Angry. Hungry. But as it burned, I noticed something strange. The denim jacket didn't catch. It just sat in the flames, darkening but not curling. I reached in with a stick and flipped it over. Something was stitched on the inside of the collar. A name I didn't recognize. Tommy L. Co. It wasn't even her lover's jacket. It wasn't anyone I knew. It hit me like a brick to the chest. I had taken that jacket from the wrong truck. Wrong night. Wrong man. Wrong everything. So much of what I believed was real had been warped by obsession. I built an execution on a lie. I was still staring at the fire when Rachel returned. She didn't say a word. She just sat beside me on the bench, watching the flames die down. After a while, she whispered, I went to the mill. I turned to her slowly. Why? I needed to see where it happened. My injury. The beginning. She stared into the fire. I stood at the exact spot where the board snapped and hit me in the head. There's still a dent in the wall. Silence. I think something in me broke that day, she said. And you tried to fix it by breaking yourself. I opened my mouth to speak, but there was nothing to say that would matter. She looked at me. Truly looked. For the first time in months. I don't hate you, she said. I do, I said back. But only the parts of me that believed I was the victim. She smiled. Just barely. And then she handed me a small black notebook. Her handwriting was all over it. Every page filled. My thoughts since the accident, she said. Some of it's nonsense. Some of it's poetry. Some of it, you should read. I opened to a random page. I wanted to be forgiven, but I didn't know what for. Another. Snow hides things. But it also preserves them. Like bones. Another. He thinks I betrayed him, but the worst betrayal was letting him believe I was still the woman he married. I closed the book. My hands shook. The fire died out, leaving only smoke. We sat together, two strangers bound by memories too broken to salvage. But maybe, not too late to bury. Not in hatred. Not in shame. But in something quieter. Something almost like peace. A week passed after the fire. The snow kept falling. The winds howled through the trees. Out here, at the edge of town, winter always lasted longer than anywhere else. It didn't just cover things, it silenced them. Rachel started talking again. Not a lot. But enough. She made soup one night. Sat beside me on the couch and ate with her legs curled beneath her, the way she used to back before the accident. She asked about the truck, about whether the tires needed chains. She even offered to go into town for supplies. But every night, she still slept in the guest room. And every morning, I woke up before dawn and stood by the bedroom window, watching the woods behind our house. I didn't know what I was waiting for. Maybe something to come walking out of the trees. Maybe nothing at all. Then came the morning she left the letter on the kitchen table. Not a note. A letter. 3 pages, handwritten in that same looping style I'd once watched her use to sign Christmas cards. She didn't hand it to me. She just placed it under my coffee mug and went outside to shovel the walk. I read it all in one sitting. Here's what it said, at least, the parts one still remember clearly. You need to know I never wanted to become what I did. There were moments when I felt something wrong moving inside me after the accident, like static behind my eyes, like I wasn't in my own body. But I don't blame you for not knowing how to help me. No one knew how. And I'm not writing this to apologize. I'm writing this so you'll understand what comes next. I'm leaving. I didn't panic. I didn't scream or break anything. I just stared at the page and reread that line, I'm leaving. There was no threat in it. No drama. Just clarity. She had packed her bag already. Just one. Duffel-sized. Her boots were by the door. A map of state highways folded neatly in her coat pocket. When I walked outside, she was leaning on the shovel, breath misting from her mouth, the sunrise turning her hair gold for a few seconds. You read it? She asked without looking at me. I nodded. I'm not going far, she added. Just west. Toward the river. You have someone there? No. She looked down at the snow, then back at me. But I don't have anyone here either. Not really. That one hit me harder than any of her past betrayals. Because it wasn't cruel. It was just true. I never meant to turn into someone else, she said softly. But I also know I can't keep trying to be the version of me you married. She's gone. That's not drama. That's just brain damage. The wind picked up again. The shovel in her hands creaked as the handle twisted slightly in her grip. I tried, I said finally. I really thought I was helping. I know you did, she said. That's what makes it worse. She turned and started walking back inside, but then paused on the porch steps. If you follow me, she said, I won't run. But I won't stop either. You'll just lose more of yourself. And then she stepped into the house and shut the door. An hour later, she was gone. The duffel bag. The coat. The boots. All of it. The driveway was clean, no tire tracks. Just footprints headed down the long path toward the road. And then nothing but snow. That night, I sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, drinking coffee gone cold. I watched the same road she'd taken, waiting again, this time not for her to come back, but for the silence to start feeling like peace. But it didn't. Not yet. Instead, I thought about the night we met. About her nervous laugh. About the little scar on her thumb from a childhood fall. And then I remembered something she wrote in the notebook she gave me. Maybe the worst part about the truth is realizing it wasn't hiding. You were just looking in the wrong direction. Maybe I had looked for proof of her betrayal so hard, I missed the proof of her pain. And maybe now, all I had left was the smoke of what we burned together. But something told me this story wasn't over. Not yet. There were still pieces in the snow, waiting to be uncovered. It had been 32 days since Rachel left. I'd counted. Not in desperation, at least, not entirely. But I was keeping track. Of the days. Of the dreams. Of the moments when the quiet of the house became unbearable. She hadn't written. She hadn't called. Not a word since the letter. But something about that silence gnawed at me like the cold wine through the attic vent. I couldn't ignore it anymore. So I packed a small bag. I didn't bring much. Just what I needed. And I headed west. The river town wasn't far. A small dot on the map with 2 diners, 1 gas station, and a cluster of cabins lining the shoreline like crooked teeth. I figured she'd picked it because it reminded her of nowhere. The kind of place you could vanish in, just like she always threatened she would when she was angry or hurting. I asked around. Showed a picture of her to the lady at the diner. She nodded. Yeah. Seen her. She's been coming in the last few nights. Real quiet. Likes the back booth by the window. I looked back at the booth. Empty now. A crumpled napkin sat near the edge of the table. Then the lady added something that froze me. She's not alone, though. Usually has a man with her. Big fella. Beard. Always wears gloves. Doesn't talk much. I thanked her and left. That night, I sat in my truck across the street from the diner, waiting. Just after 8 p.m., I saw her. Rachel. Hair pulled back. Same coat. Still beautiful, but thinner now. The hard kind of thin. And beside her, sure enough, was a tall man. Broad shoulders. Covered in a heavy wool coat and black gloves. He kept his head down. They didn't talk much. They ate. They left. And they walked hand in hand to one of the cabins by the water. I followed. Quiet. The cabin lights flickered on. I waited. An hour passed. Then 2. And just when I'd given up on doing anything about it, just when I started the truck to head back to town, I saw something that changed everything. Rachel walked out alone. She stood under the porch light, looking right at me. She knew. She'd known I was there the whole time. She walked up to the truck. Knocked on the window. I rolled it down. Her face was calm. "You wanna come inside?" she asked softly. "Who's the guy?" She looked over her shoulder at the cabin. Then back at me. "You'll see." Inside, it was warm. A fire crackled in the stone hearth. The man sat at the table. Still wearing gloves. Face hidden by shadows. "Sit," Rachel said. "We should talk." I sat. The man didn't move. "Who is he?" I asked again. She didn't answer. Instead, she said, "Do you remember the night of the sawmill accident?" I nodded. "The morning after, you told the foreman I'd been careless. You said you'd warned me about tying my hair back. That I'd ignored you." My chest tightened. "I didn't mean it like that. I was just—" "No," she interrupted. "You told him because you were scared they'd blame you. Because you were the one who cut the lock off the guard panel. That stopped me cold." "How do you know that?" She smiled, sadly. Like she'd been carrying it for years. "Because I remember now." The man at the table stood. Finally. And when he stepped into the light, I realized something. He wasn't real. Not exactly. He was me. Same eyes. Same jaw. Same boots I wore the day I proposed to her in the woods behind my parents' house. Only, not quite. He was who I had been. Before the lies. Before the fear. Before I let my pride hollow me out. Rachel stood between us. Tears in her eyes. "I built him," she said. "Piece by piece. Every night you didn't listen. Every time you blamed me instead of helping me." I looked at her. Then at the man. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. Because I understood now. This was never about the cheating. Not really. This was about what we became after the sawmill. After the brain injury. After the snowstorms. After we both gave up pretending we still knew each other. And this version of me, this silent, gloved man, was what she turned to because I stopped being who I said I was. She turned pain into memory. Memory into fiction. Fiction into comfort. "Why show me this?" I whispered. "Because I needed you to see what I lost," she said. "And what I made instead." I stepped toward the man. He didn't flinch. I reached for the glove. Pulled it off. And there, on his wrist, was the small scar I got from the fence post the day I fixed her mother's barn. She remembered everything. Even when I thought she didn't. I left the cabin just after midnight. She didn't ask me to stay. I didn't ask her to come back. As I drove east, the snow began to fall again. But this time, it felt different. Like it wasn't there to bury anything. Just to cleanse what had already died.